I just want to say that if you ever want to do a 1 week personal silent retreat in the middle of an election that will determine the democracy of your country in the middle of a pandemic, don't do it. I had no idea when I planned this week that it was in the middle of the elections. I wasn't thinking, and I said, okay, great, I'm going to just let it go and just have my Chenrezig retreat. Wrong. I mean, after so much of listening and discussing and watching the whole political thing unfold, I had so much in here that I had to really accept that that's what my retreat was going to be about, how to deal with my mind in relationship to that. Because I couldn't steer my mind away from these incredible images of Mr. Trump on one side with all of his supporters in full technicolor, and then on the other side, Mr. Biden with his rainbow legion of everybody in whatever they're wearing, technicolor, with a lot of opinions then about what these images meant to me. So I figured, well, if I'm not going to be able to put these down, then I came up with this idea of exploring how do I see these two men and all their supporters so seemingly different in my mind, and so inherently so. What am I projecting on each of them? Now, Venerable mentions it a lot in terms of being a strategy for the self-centered thought and the self-grasping I. She uses the word I'm going to use today is projecting or projection. I don't know whether it's the same as imputing, but that's the word that I've heard her say recently, and that's the one that's in my mind. And that I've done just a little bit of research of what the therapeutic community says about this activity of the mind. That it's a defense mechanism, an afflicted mind, where we're taking the unacceptable aspects of ourselves, totally disowning them, and then placing them on top of somebody else. Now, it was interesting with the little research that I did that we not only do this with the unattractive, afflictive things about our own minds that we don't like and we want to disown, but they say unconsciously we do the same thing with our good qualities, ones that we are unable or unwilling to recognize or even admit that we have them, and we also take those and project them onto other people. So the ones that are afflicted, negative exaggerations then of course bring up anger and all of its permutations, and then the ones that we exaggerate and project onto other people that have all of our good qualities that we can't recognize, then it brings up a lot of attachment and craving. And I have found that for myself that I fall into this, or I'm recognizing in this retreat that anytime things get hard for me, like internally, or things get scary, and that could be internal or what I perceive external, or when I feel vulnerable, this is one of the mechanisms that is like an immediate default for me to somehow protect this sense of I, this sense of identity. And this whole election thing was kind of coming up from my identity of what I hold dear as, quote, an American. And that what happens in my mind is that it clouds my mind to the extent that I can't see the whole person, and I burden them with a lot of my stuff, and that it robs me with the opportunity to actually look at what is going on in my mind and take responsibility for that. And as I watched my mind through the retreat, is I could see the amazing, quote, rationale that can seem very convincing. And for me, my rationale is usually presented by a whole bunch of lawyers, legal counsel, eyewitnesses. I mean, it gets really crowded in my mind when I'm trying to sort of project and justify how I see things. So in looking at, in the therapeutic psychological community, what sometimes causes these projections to happen? What are we trying to disown? And there's a whole litany, and I think all of us can probably agree with some of this, probably not an exhaustive list. We'll want to project any fear and anxiety we may have, shame, blame, insecurities, traumas, issues around our parents, around authority figures, expectations, biases, prejudices, and they've got a large category that's called unfinished business, which we're not even aware of. But anyway, any of these things that we don't want, we inadvertently exaggerate with inappropriate attention, project these onto a person, a situation, a group of people. So when I looked at, and it's like projecting, projections like dumping a lot of clutter onto somebody's living room and then criticizing them for being such slobs. We've just totally disowned it and then blame them or give them all of it. So as I watch my mind regarding the election, I was saying, well, you're not really being harmed here. Fear and anxiety are two of my big projections. But I may not be being harmed, but my values and how I see my values of honesty, integrity, ethical conduct being threatened, and our elections somehow, projected onto them the symbology around this election means that to me as an American. And as a result, because I was perceiving that might not happen, all this fear and anger and anxiety arose. So then I'm trying to say, well, what's arising in my mind when I think, someone in power is using their behavior, their actions to incite harm, violence, racism. I get, and it just triggers this fear of my core values being dismantled and being totally induced. And what happens with projection, at least from what I could see when I was sitting and looking at this whole array of thoughts, is that projections can be placed on top of a fairly accurate assessment of what is going on. I mean, some of this stuff we can't say we're making it up. We can't say what's going on in our country is projections of our mind. But whatever's going on, and for me, the behavior of certain people is a trigger. And then the projection with the inappropriate attention then goes ahead and goes on top of this so that my ability to try to find equanimity, to try to kind of, balance out my mind and calm it down can't happen because the threat is too big. And because I'm an extremely creative ruminator, this was going on for like hours. I could not almost stop myself. So then what I did is I said, well, let's do some analysis on when do I go to projection? What's happening and why? Why is this self-centered thought running my mind right now? So there's a few things that kind of made sense that I found out about my mind, and I wanted to share these with you. So one of them they say is allowing someone to push your buttons and get under your skin in a way that nobody else does. This is like the extreme of just finding fault, is that there's absolutely nothing redeeming about them. When I see what's going on and how some people in power are behaving, for me, it's a real practice for me to even be able to say, just like me, they want to be happy and not suffer. I can't even get that out. My self-centered thought comes up and says, right, and what about all those millions of people that they make suffer who also want to be happy? Okay, so then my mind goes back thinking about Shenrezi. And yes, these people are trying to create happiness in the causes and they're confused. Remember that those who are harming people now are going to create the causes for suffering in the future. This is Shenrezi talking to me. I kind of have him off to the side. And haven't you gotten confused and harmed others just like this in your life? Yes, but I've harmed just a few, not millions of people. They should be held accountable. And then Shenrezi says, yes, they need to be held accountable, but does your anger help you wanting that? You keep yourself awake at night, literally, with these projections. For 3 nights in a row, I did not sleep. Is it helpful to you or to anyone? Once again, some accurate assessment of what is going on. The projections don't help you to deal with your mind. So that's one of them. The next one Shenrezi says is, well, feeling highly reactive and quick to blame. That's another one of my ways in which I project. And he says to me, well, the whole election situation is a dependent arising, Semke. There's no one person, there's no one group, there's no one cause that's bringing this about. This is like innumerable, countless causes and conditions that are changing moment by moment. We have no idea. You have no idea. Or what karma individually and collectively is ripening. And that's worth pondering because you need to take ownership on what's happening to you right now. See, Shenrezi has to talk to me sometimes like this. Sometimes he's sweet, and sometimes he's kind of like this. The other one is noticing your reactivity is a reoccurring pattern. So when I thought about this, I said, this one was really helpful for me. Because for me to recognize that I have reoccurring fears about things falling apart when someone I perceive is going against the norms or agreed upon shared values and expectations, mine or groups, this happens in this community, and this happens with me in relationship to the country right now. That a person is somehow endangering the harmony, the well-being, and the cohesiveness of this community or the nation because of what I'm perceiving, and that this is a life pattern that I recognize in the retreat that I've been doing since I was a child. And this election had just really brought it up for me to see. The next one they say is to notice you're the only person to notice or experience these issues with the person. You're the only one that's having a problem. I mean, this happens in community here. I have a problem with somebody. I go to talk to one of our wise seniors or venerable, and they go, really? Are you sure that's happening? And I'm like, yes, it's happening exactly as I'm seeing it. No, I'm not seeing that. I'm hearing your anger. I'm hearing your anxiety, but it doesn't sound like it's worth the time and the energy, so just let it go. What do you mean, let it go? So there's this whole, this idea about there's one person in the community and that there's all this imputing and everybody else is fine. So I take this then into the election and I go, there are 74 million people who think one person is an existential threat to our democracy. We have 70 million people who think this person is great and want 4 more years. And vice versa, 74 million people think another person is ethical, principled, and would be of the greatest benefit to our country and the world. And we have the same 70 million people who think he is an existential threat to this country and to their freedom. This is the power of our minds to see the same two people and each other in totally different lights due to these projections, due to the exaggerations. It's not, once again, that some assessments are not accurate. It's what we are doing. And we're not passing this out as an opinion. We're passing these out as statements of fact. So now my point is not how to fix this perceived abyss, but to examine how powerful our projections are. There can be an accuracy, a correct assessment with the behaviors we're seeing, either projecting good or bad, but what our minds individually and collectively think about both the men and their supporters, then project upon them all of this stuff, represents to me, and this is the conclusion I had at the end of the week, is that the mind is the creator of our own experience and the source of our happiness and pain. And this is going on for millions of people, sentient beings with the minds that we have. Totally different realities going on. So how can I ease off of this? Still assess wisely, but bring about some compassion into the mix for everybody. I mean, this is tiring. And so I went back to Venerable's teachings during this retreat on Shantideva, and this is what she has said about this particular thing. It was interesting that it kind of coincided. She said, and I have some paraphrases in here because I had to work through some of the words that she spoke. She said, we are just like them. We can call out things, destructive behavior, beliefs that are non-virtuous. We need to speak up, but we do this without anger and hatred. And for me, without my projections on what anger and hatred are doing in my mind as a result of this. Subduing our anger and hatred does not mean we stick our head in the sand and say, forget it, I'm not getting involved. I'm going to go into retreat. I don't want to concentrate on this. I want to just concentrate on my own life, my own practice. So she says to balance our mind from its tendency to put either groups or people in a box, write them off, or put our heads in the sand and not want to deal with it. We are all overwhelmed by afflictions, and for many people, they have no wisdom to guide them in the middle of all of this. She continues to say, we use what little wisdom, mind we have. And this was the part that very much helped me because I see things in pictures a lot, which is one of the problems I have in my practice, is the Technicolor movies that I play. But she said is to not forget the idea that we are all in samsara together in the same lifeboat, crossing the sea of samsara. So my lifeboat had all of the Trump and Biden supporters, all the GOP, all the Democrats, all the talk show hosts, Black Lives Matter, QAnon, frontline workers, Jared Kushner, Dr. Fauci. And she said all the Buddhas, the Bodhisattvas on the path of accumulation and on the path of preparation are in the lifeboat with us. They have not, realized emptiness. They're still, in the cycle. She said to hold our moral ground with compassion and wisdom. So I think that this is hard and a life training and thought training. I mean, that is really what I walked away from in this retreat. This is a time in our life, time in our history, time in our existence. I'm sure we've had millions of them, limitless ones of this nature. But we cannot leave anyone out of our bodhicitta, or it is simply not bodhicitta. That this time in particular is a powerful time to transform in a huge way. And that the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are here to support us and to remember that we're in this lifeboat together. So Chenrezig kind of, pulled me out from this retreat of, fear and anxiety and projection. I got a little bit more clarity about my mind, but to remember that we really are truly in this together and we have a lot of support, including the Dharma and including our teachers. And I do want to personally, on a note, give a shout out to the 460,000 poll workers who counted every one of those votes, all of our Secretary of States, our Attorney Generals, and I really want to personally bow to all of our African American women in our country who definitely, put it on their backs again. So to all of you, thank you very much. Let's keep on keeping on.